Cursed Heir. Celine Ashworth had never spoken the forbidden name carved into the old chapel door. Not until tonight. The moment the syllables left her lips, the world shuddered. The torches burned cold. The wind held its breath. And then he stepped forward golden-eyed, unreadable, his voice curling around her like a promise. "You should not have said my name," he murmured, "because now I will never leave your side." Chapter 1. The Whispering of the Forbidden Name. The salt spray stung Celine Ashworth's face, a familiar discomfort that mirrored the constant ache in her heart. At 62, she thought the sharp edges of grief would have softened, dulled by the relentless passage of time. But the sea, much like her sorrow, remained a turbulent, unpredictable force. Tonight, it roared a symphony of mourning, a mournful counterpoint to the wind howling through the skeletal remains of the abandoned chapel perched precariously on the cliff edge. Celine hadn't intended to come here. Not tonight, not ever. The chapel, with its crumbling walls and air of profound desolation, held too many echoes of him of Thomas, her husband, lost to the very sea that now crashed below. He'd been a fisherman, his life inextricably bound to the unpredictable whims of the ocean, and it had claimed him 20 years ago, leaving Celine adrift in a world suddenly devoid of color and warmth. But the cryptic, unsettling letter that had arrived this morning, tucked anonymously into her mailbox, had drawn her here like a moth to a flickering, dangerous flame. If you wish to know the truth, Celine had read, the elegant script somehow both familiar and utterly foreign, speak the name on the chapel door. At midnight. Under the waning moon. The truth. What truth? The official reports had been clear. A rogue wave, a sudden storm, a tragic accident. Yet, a persistent, gnawing doubt had always lingered in the shadowed corners of Celine's mind. A feeling, more than a thought, that something more had been at play that fateful night. The chapel door, once grand and imposing, was now a ravaged testament to time and neglect. Rotting wood, scarred by wind and weather, was barely held together by rusted hinges. And carved into the center, almost obscured by layers of lichen and decay, was a single word, a name. Valerian. It was a name she'd heard whispered in hushed tones throughout her childhood, a name associated with local legends, with dark tales of the sea and those who dwelled within its hidden depths. A name her grandmother had strictly forbidden her to ever utter, claiming it was a key, a gateway to something ancient and profoundly dangerous. A name linked, inexplicably, to the Ashworth family for generations. Celine traced the outline of the letters with a trembling finger, the rough wood snagging on her skin. The air around her grew thick, heavy, charged with an almost palpable energy. The scent of salt intensified, mingled with something else, something musky, wild, like the heart of a deep forest. The moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, seemed to hold its breath. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the numbness that had enveloped her for so long. She should leave. She should turn around and walk away, back to the safety of her quiet cottage, her solitary life. But the pull, the insistent, magnetic force emanating from the name, was too strong to resist. It resonated with something deep within her, a forgotten part of herself, a yearning for answers, for closure, for something more. The wind whipped around her, tugging at her gray hair, swirling her long, wool skirt around her legs. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and, against every instinct of self-preservation, spoke the forbidden name. Valerian. The world shuddered. It was a subtle tremor, a vibration that ran through the ground beneath her feet, up through her spine, settling in the very core of her being. The torches that she had lit, more out of habit than necessity, given the automatic street lamps now dotting the cliff path, flared with an unnatural, blue light, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. The wind died down, leaving an unnerving silence in its wake, broken only by the relentless crashing of the waves far below. Celine opened her eyes, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a moment, nothing happened. Disappointment, sharp and bitter, pricked at her. Perhaps it was all just foolishness, old wives' tales, a desperate woman grasping at straws. And then he stepped forward. He emerged from the shadows at the back of the chapel, as if he had been waiting there, concealed, for an eternity. He was tall, impossibly so, his figure silhouetted against the faint moonlight filtering through the broken stained glass windows. As he moved closer, Celine could make out the details, a strong, angular jaw, shadowed by a neatly trimmed beard that hinted at silver amongst the dark, a high forehead, and eyes that glowed with an inner light, a golden, mesmerizing intensity that seemed to pierce through her very soul. He was dressed in clothes that seemed both ancient and timeless, a dark, heavy coat that reached his knees, tailored trousers, and boots that looked as if they had walked countless miles across centuries. There was an aura of power around him, a quiet, contained energy that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. He was beautiful, undeniably so, but in a way that was unsettling, almost dangerous. He looked to be in his late 30s, but the depth in his eyes spoke of an age far beyond human reckoning. Celine took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her throat. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, to ask who he was, what he was, but the words caught in her throat, trapped by a mixture of fear and something else, something she hadn't felt in decades, a spark of fascination, of undeniable attraction. He stopped a few feet away, his golden eyes studying her with an unnerving intensity. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant cry of a seagull. Then he spoke, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "You should not have said my name," he murmured, his voice curling around her like a promise, or perhaps a threat. "Because now I will never leave your side." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Celine stared at him, her mind reeling. What had she done? What had she unleashed? He tilted his head, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, and a ghost of a smile played on his lips. A smile that didn't reach his eyes. A smile that sent a shiver of both fear and something inexplicably thrilling down her spine. She had to know. She had to understand. But as she opened her mouth to speak, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through her head, a searing agony that made her cry out and stumble. What was happening to her? Chapter 2. Shadows in the Forgotten Chapel. The pain receded as quickly as it had struck, leaving Celine gasping for breath, her hand pressed against her temple. She felt dizzy, disoriented, as if the world had tilted on its axis. Valerian hadn't moved, his golden eyes still fixed on her, their intensity unwavering. He seemed concerned, but it was a concern layered with something else, something colder, more calculating. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice still that low, resonant rumble, but now edged with a hint of something that might have been impatience. Celine straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. What was that?" she managed, her voice trembling. He tilted his head, a slow, deliberate movement. "The name, it has power. It binds. It awakens." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on her face, her hands, her silver pendant, a simple, intertwined knot of Celtic design, a gift from Thomas. "You are not accustomed to such energies." "Energies?" Celine echoed, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of his words. "What are you talking about? What are you?" He stepped closer, and Celine instinctively recoiled, the scent of him, that wild, musky, forest-like aroma intensifying. It was a scent that both repelled and intrigued her, a primal, unsettling scent that spoke of something ancient and untamed. "I am Valerian," he said, as if that single word explained everything. "And you, Celine Ashworth, are connected to me, bound to me, by the name you spoke, by the blood that runs in your veins." Celine shook her head, bewildered. "Bound to you? I don't understand. I've never met you before in my life." "Not in this life, perhaps," Valerian conceded, a strange, almost wistful expression flickering in his golden eyes. "But our paths have crossed before, Celine. Many times. Across centuries." He reached out his long, elegant fingers brushing against her cheek. Celine flinched at the contact, a jolt of electricity, both terrifying and exhilarating, shooting through her. His touch was cool, surprisingly so, yet it left a trail of fire in its wake. "You feel it, don't you?" he murmured, his gaze locking with hers. The pull, the connection, the echo of something ancient and profound. Celine couldn't deny it. There was something, a strange, unsettling familiarity, a sense of recognition that defied logic and reason. It was as if she had known him forever, yet he was a complete stranger. I don't understand," she repeated, her voice weaker this time. Valerian withdrew his hand, his expression hardening. "You will. In time. But for now, know this. You are in danger, Celine. And I am here to protect you."
Danger?
Celine scoffed, a flicker of defiance sparking within her. "From what? From old wives' tales? From superstitious nonsense? From those who would seek to exploit the power that flows within you," Valerian said, his voice deadly serious. "The power that you have awakened by speaking my name." He turned, gesturing towards the crumbling altar at the far end of the chapel. "This place, it is a nexus, a point of convergence between worlds. And you, Celine, are a key that can unlock untold power." Celine followed his gaze, her eyes scanning the ruined altar, the faded frescoes depicting scenes of ancient rituals, of figures that seemed to blend human and animal forms. A shiver ran down her spine. "I'm just an ordinary woman," she protested, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't have any power." Valerian turned back to her, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "You are anything but ordinary, Celine. You are a descendant of a long line of guardians, protectors of the balance. And your blood, it carries the mark of the wolf." Celine stared at him, speechless. The mark of the wolf? What was he talking about? This was madness. Utter, complete madness. She had to get away from him, from this place, from this insanity. She turned to flee, but Valerian moved with a speed that was impossible, blurring before her eyes, blocking her path. He stood there, tall and imposing, his presence filling the chapel, leaving her no escape. "You cannot run, Celine," he said softly, his voice laced with a strange mixture of tenderness and menace. "Not from me. Not from your destiny." He reached out again, this time taking her hand. His grip was firm, possessive, yet strangely gentle. Celine tried to pull away, but she couldn't. It was as if she were rooted to the spot, held captive by his gaze, by his touch, by the undeniable power that radiated from him. "Trust me," he whispered, his golden eyes searching hers. "I will keep you safe. I will show you the truth."
But you must trust me.
Trust him? Trust this creature, this being who spoke of ancient connections, of untold power, of the mark of the wolf? It was impossible. And yet, as she looked into his eyes, those mesmerizing, golden eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, she felt a flicker of something that resembled hope. A desperate, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, he could offer her the answers she had been seeking for so long. But as she hesitated, another wave of pain, sharper this time, shot through her, followed by a vision. Thomas, his face contorted in terror, reaching out to her as a monstrous wave engulfed him. But behind the wave a shadow, a pair of golden eyes, watching. Chapter 3. The bargain struck in moonlight. The vision vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Celine trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She clutched at Valerian's arm, not out of trust, but out of a desperate need for grounding, for something solid to hold on to in this swirling vortex of confusion and fear. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I saw him." Valerian's grip tightened on her hand, his golden eyes darkening with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't quite sympathy, but something deeper, more complex. "Perhaps regret?" "The sea," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the renewed howling of the wind outside. "It holds many secrets, Celine. Many sorrows." But the eyes, Celine pressed, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a sudden surge of anger and grief. I saw golden eyes in the wave. Watching him die. Valerian was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the crumbling walls of the chapel. The moonlight filtering through the broken windows cast long, dancing shadows, making him look even more ethereal, more otherworldly. There are forces at play, Celine, he finally said, his voice low and grave. Forces that you cannot yet comprehend. Forces that have been at war for centuries. And your husband, he was caught in the crossfire. Caught in the crossfire? Celine repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. He was a fisherman. A good man. He didn't deserve to die like that. No, Valerian agreed, his golden eyes meeting hers, their intensity unwavering. He did not. But his death, it was not entirely random. It was a warning. A message.
To you.
Celine stared at him, her mind reeling. A message?
To me? But why?
Because of who you are, Valerian said, his voice taking on a new urgency. Because of the power you possess. The power you are only just beginning to understand. He released her hand, taking a step back, giving her some space. Celine wrapped her arms around herself, feeling a sudden chill despite the heavy wool coat she wore. I don't want any power, she said, her voice trembling. I just want to understand what happened to Thomas. I want the truth. Valerian nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. And I will give you the truth, Celine. All of it. But it will come at a price. Celine looked at him warily. What price? He hesitated, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the silver Celtic knot pendant that rested against her chest. Your trust, he said softly. Your allegiance. You must agree to work with me, to learn from me, to embrace your destiny. Embrace my destiny? Celine echoed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. My destiny is to live a quiet life, alone, mourning the man I loved. That's all there is. That is what you believe, Valerian countered, his voice firm. But it is not the truth. Your destiny is far greater, far more complex than you can possibly imagine. And it is intertwined with mine. He paused, his golden eyes searching hers. I can offer you protection, Celine. I can shield you from those who would seek to harm you, to exploit your power. I can teach you how to control it, how to wield it. And I can help you find the answers you seek about your husband's death. But in return you must pledge yourself to me. You must swear an oath. An oath. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. It was a commitment, a binding agreement, a surrender of something. Celine wasn't sure what, but she knew, instinctively, that it was a decision that would change her life forever. She looked at him, at this enigmatic, powerful being who had stepped out of the shadows and into her life, turning her world upside down. He was dangerous, she knew that. He was something other, something not entirely human. And yet there was something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, of loneliness, that resonated with her own deep-seated sorrow. And there was the promise of answers, of closure, of finally understanding the truth about Thomas's death. It was a temptation she couldn't resist. What kind of oath? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Valerian smiled, a slow, seductive smile that sent a shiver down her spine. A simple one, he said. An oath of loyalty, of protection, of mutual understanding. He extended his hand towards her, his palm open, inviting her to take it. Swear to me, Celine Ashworth, that you will walk this path with me, that you will trust me, even when you do not understand, that you will fight by my side, against the darkness that threatens to consume us both. Celine hesitated, her mind racing. This was madness. She was about to pledge herself to a creature she barely knew, a creature who spoke of ancient powers and hidden worlds. But the vision of Thomas, his face contorted in terror, flashed before her eyes again. And the golden eyes watching. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. I swear, she said, her voice trembling but firm. She placed her hand in his, her fingers cold against his surprisingly warm skin. The moment their hands touched, a jolt of energy surged through her, a powerful, overwhelming force that made her gasp. The chapel seemed to spin around her, the moonlight intensifying, bathing them both in an ethereal glow. Valerian's golden eyes burned into hers, and she felt a connection, a bond, forming between them, a link that went beyond words, beyond understanding. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly undeniable. The oath had taken hold. But as she looked deeply into his eyes, a fleeting shadow crossed them, a darkness that chilled her to the bone, reminding her that this bargain might cost her more than she could ever imagine. Chapter 4. Echoes of a Forgotten Life. The world settled back into focus, the dizzying sensation receding, leaving Celine feeling strangely altered. The connection with Valerian remained, a subtle hum of energy that thrummed beneath her skin, a constant reminder of the oath she had just sworn. It was unsettling, yet also strangely comforting. Valerian's grip on her hand tightened, a possessive gesture that sent a shiver of both apprehension and anticipation through her. He didn't release her, but instead, gently tugged her closer, his golden eyes searching her face. "Good," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "The bond is forged. The path is set." He released her hand, finally, and Celine instinctively rubbed her palm, feeling a lingering warmth where his skin had touched hers. She felt different, lighter, somehow, yet also burdened with a new, unknown weight. What happens now?" she asked, her voice still trembling slightly. Valerian turned, gesturing towards the narrow, winding path that led away from the chapel and down towards the small, coastal town nestled in the cove below. It was a town she knew intimately, a town where she had lived her entire life, a town that suddenly felt foreign, unfamiliar. "We go," he said simply. "To your home. We have much to discuss, much to uncover." Celine hesitated. Her cottage, her sanctuary, the place where she had retreated from the world after Thomas's death, it felt like a lifetime ago. Could she really bring him there, this creature of shadows and secrets, into her carefully constructed, solitary world? But she had sworn an oath. She had made a bargain, and she had to see it through. "All right," she said, her voice stronger this time, fueled by a newfound determination. "Let's go." They walked in silence, the only sounds the crunch of their footsteps on the gravel path and the distant roar of the ocean. The moon, now lower in the sky, cast long, elongated shadows that danced around them, making Valerian look even more imposing, more otherworldly. Celine stole glances at him as they walked, studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the subtle silver glinting within the neatly trimmed beard. He was beautiful, undeniably so, but in a way that was unsettling, almost dangerous. He moved with a grace and power that was both mesmerizing and intimidating. She wondered about him, about his past, about the centuries he had alluded to. What had he seen? What had he done? What secrets did he carry within those enigmatic, golden eyes? As they reached the outskirts of the town, the familiar sights and sounds began to reassert themselves: the gentle glow of streetlights, the distant bark of a dog, the faint smell of wood smoke from chimneys. It was a scene of ordinary, everyday life, a scene that seemed utterly incongruous with the supernatural events that had just transpired. Celine's cottage was located at the edge of town, a small, whitewashed building with a rambling garden that she had neglected in recent years. It was a place of bittersweet memories, a place where she had shared laughter and love with Thomas, a place that now echoed with his absence. As they approached the front door, Celine hesitated again, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She glanced at Valerian, his golden eyes watching her, waiting. This is my home," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he replied softly, his gaze sweeping over the cottage, taking in the details: the faded curtains in the windows, the overgrown rose bushes climbing the walls, the weathered wooden bench on the small porch. "It is peaceful." There was a hint of something in his voice, a wistfulness, a longing, that surprised Celine. She wondered if he had ever known such peace, such normality. She pushed open the door, stepping inside, Valerian following close behind. The cottage was filled with the familiar scent of lavender and old books, a scent that usually comforted her, but tonight, it felt suffocating. The interior was dimly lit, the only light coming from a small, flickering lamp on a side table. Celine reached out and switched on a brighter overhead light, revealing the familiar clutter of her life: stacks of books, piles of knitting, framed photographs of Thomas, of happier times. Valerian stood in the center of the room, his presence seeming to fill the small space, making it feel even smaller. He looked out of place, like a wild creature brought indoors, his inherent power and untamed energy at odds with the quiet domesticity of the setting. "Make yourself comfortable," Celine said awkwardly, gesturing towards a worn armchair by the fireplace. Valerian nodded, but he didn't sit. Instead, he began to wander around the room, his golden eyes scanning the objects, the photographs, the details of her life, as if searching for something. He stopped in front of a framed photograph of Thomas, a picture taken on their wedding day, Celine radiant in a simple white dress, Thomas beaming beside her, his arm around her waist. Valerian stared at the photograph for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, he reached out his long, elegant fingers tracing the outline of Thomas's face. "He loved you," he said softly, his voice devoid of its usual edge. Celine felt a lump form in her throat. "Yes," she whispered.
He did.
"And you loved him," Valerian continued, his gaze still fixed on the photograph. "With all my heart," Celine replied, her voice choked with emotion. Valerian turned to her, his golden eyes meeting hers, their intensity unwavering. "But love, it can be a weakness, Celine. A vulnerability. It can be exploited." His words sent a chill down her spine. Was he warning her? Or was he threatening her? Before she could respond, he moved again, his gaze falling on a small, wooden box that sat on a shelf above the fireplace. It was an old, intricately carved box that had belonged to her grandmother, a box she hadn't opened in years. "What is this?" he asked, his voice regaining its edge. Celine felt a sudden surge of protectiveness. It's just an old box," she said, her voice defensive. "It's nothing important." But Valerian was already reaching for it, his long fingers easily grasping the box and lifting it down from the shelf. He held it in his hands, his golden eyes studying the intricate carvings, the strange symbols that adorned its surface. "This is not nothing," he said softly, his voice laced with a hint of excitement. "This is a key. Another key." He looked at Celine, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her heart pound. "Open it," he commanded. Celine hesitated. She hadn't opened that box in years, not since her grandmother's death. She didn't even remember what was inside. But the look in Valerian's eyes, the urgency in his voice, told her that this was not a request. It was a demand, and she knew, instinctively, that whatever was inside that box was about to change her life, yet again. As she reached for the box, she couldn't help but wonder if she was opening a door to answers, or to a deeper, more terrifying darkness. Chapter 5. The Unveiling of the Ancient Curse. Celine's fingers trembled as she reached for the box. It felt heavier than she remembered, the wood cool and smooth beneath her touch. The intricate carvings seemed to writhe and shift in the lamplight, the strange symbols whispering secrets she couldn't understand. She glanced at Valerian, his golden eyes fixed on her, his expression a mixture of anticipation and warning. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Open it," he repeated, his voice firm, unwavering. Celine took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She had come this far. She had sworn an oath. She had to see it through. The box opened with a soft click, the hinges protesting slightly after years of disuse. A faint scent of dried herbs and something metallic wafted from within. Celine lifted the lid, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a silver ring. It wasn't just any ring. It was a thick, heavy band of intricately worked silver, depicting a wolf's head, its jaws slightly open, revealing sharp, menacing teeth. The wolf's eyes were two tiny, glittering gemstones, the same mesmerizing golden color as Valerian's. Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The ring, it was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly familiar. She had seen it before in her dreams, in fleeting visions, in the shadowed corners of her memory. Valerian stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the ring. He reached out, his long fingers hovering over it, but he didn't touch it. "The ring of the Ashworths," he murmured, his voice a low, reverent whisper. "The symbol of your lineage and your curse." Celine stared at him, bewildered. "Curse?" she echoed. "What curse?" Valerian turned to her, his golden eyes locking with hers. "The Ashworth family, you are not ordinary humans, Celine. You are descendants of a long line of werewolves." Celine recoiled, a gasp escaping her lips. "Werewolves?" she repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. That's impossible. It's just a story. A legend." "It is more than a legend," Celine, Valerian said, his voice deadly serious. "It is your heritage, your bloodline, and it is bound to a curse, an ancient curse that has plagued your family for generations." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on her face, her hands, the silver Celtic knot pendant that rested against her chest. "The curse that prevents you from fully embracing your wolf nature. It suppresses your power, keeps you trapped between worlds, unable to fully transform, unable to fully live." He looked back at the ring. "Every generation, one member of the Ashworth family is chosen marked to bear the burden of the curse, and to seek a way to break it." Celine shook her head, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of his words. "But I've never felt anything different," she protested. "The curse, it is subtle," Valerian explained. "It works slowly, insidiously, eroding your connection to your true self, leaving you feeling incomplete, unfulfilled. Like a piece of you is missing." Celine thought back on her life, on the constant ache of loneliness, the feeling of being adrift, of never quite belonging. Had that been the curse? Had that been the reason she had always felt different? "And Thomas?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Was he?" "He was not," Valerian said softly. "He was an anchor, a grounding force, a way to keep you tethered to the human world." But the eyes, Celine pressed, remembering the vision she had seen in the chapel. The golden eyes in the wave, watching him die. Valerian was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached out and gently took the ring from the box. He held it up, the golden gemstones glittering in the lamplight. "The curse, it was placed upon your ancestors by a rival clan," he said, his voice low and grave. "A clan of hunters. Those who sought to eradicate the werewolf line, to wipe out your kind." Valerian paused, his eyes darkening. "They could not kill all of you, it would seem. So they instead cursed you all, binding a powerful entity to your bloodline. One intended to ensure none of your kind would ever reach their full potential. One to keep the werewolves weak forever." "And those eyes?" Celine prompted. "Belong to the one bound to your curse," Valerian confirmed, his voice laced with a hint of fear. "A creature of immense power, a creature that feeds on the unfulfilled potential of the Ashworth line." He turned to Celine, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "And you, Celine," he said softly, "you are the key to breaking the curse. You are the one who can finally set your family free." He held out to her the ring. "But to do so, you must embrace your wolf nature. You must accept the power that flows within you. And you must trust me." Celine stared at the ring, at the wolf's head with its menacing teeth and mesmerizing golden eyes. It was a symbol of her heritage, of her curse, of her destiny. It was a terrifying prospect, but also a liberating one. For the first time in her life, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense of purpose, a reason to fight. But as she reached out to take the ring, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through her head again, and she saw a fleeting image, a dark, shadowy figure, its eyes burning with a malevolent, golden light, reaching out to claim her. Chapter 6. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. The vision, brief but intense, left Celine gasping, her hand recoiling from the ring as if it were burning hot. She stumbled back, clutching her head, the pain throbbing behind her eyes. Valerian was instantly at her side, his arm around her waist, supporting her. "Celine, what is it? What did you see?" She shook her head, trying to clear the lingering image of the shadowy figure, the malevolent golden eyes. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. A figure dark with eyes like yours, but evil." Valerian's expression hardened, his golden eyes darkening with a mixture of anger and concern. "The guardian," he murmured, his voice low and grim. "The creature bound to the curse. It senses you're awakening your growing power. It is trying to reach you." "Reach me?" Celine echoed, fear creeping into her voice. What does it want?" "To control you," Valerian said simply. "To feed on your potential, to keep you trapped within the confines of the curse. To prevent you from ever breaking free." He gently guided her to the armchair by the fireplace, helping her to sit down. Celine sank into the worn cushions, feeling drained, exhausted. The weight of her newly discovered heritage, the burden of the ancient curse, felt almost too heavy to bear. Valerian knelt before her, his golden eyes searching her face. "You are strong, Celine," he said softly, his voice laced with a surprising tenderness. "Stronger than you know. You can fight this. You can overcome the curse." Celine looked at him, at this enigmatic, powerful being who had sworn to protect her, to guide her. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but the fear, the doubt, it lingered, a cold, insidious presence in the back of her mind. I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Valerian reached out, his long fingers gently brushing a stray strand of gray hair from her forehead. His touch was cool, surprisingly so, yet it sent a shiver of warmth through her, a spark of hope in the darkness. "You can," he said firmly, his gaze locking with hers. "And I will be here to help you. Every step of the way." He stood up, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the room. He walked over to the window, looking out at the quiet, sleeping town, the moon casting a silvery glow over the rooftops. "The curse, it is not unbreakable," he said, his voice thoughtful. "There are ways to weaken it, to diminish its power, and ultimately to sever the connection entirely." Celine looked at him, her heart flickering with a fragile hope.
"How?"
she asked. Valerian turned back to her, his golden eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "It will require sacrifice," he said, his voice laced with a hint of regret. "And it will be dangerous. But it is possible." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the silver Celtic knot pendant that rested against her chest. "The key lies in embracing your wolf nature," he continued, "in understanding your heritage, your power, and in forging a bond with your true mate." Celine frowned. "My true mate?" she echoed. "But Thomas was your human mate," Valerian said softly. "A love that transcended the boundaries of your different natures. But he was not your true mate, your soulmate, the one who is destined to share your power, to walk beside you, to complete you." Celine shook her head, confused. "I don't understand. Are you saying I have another mate? A werewolf mate?" Valerian smiled, a slow, seductive smile that sent a shiver down her spine. "Perhaps," he said cryptically, "or perhaps something more." He moved closer, his presence filling the room, his scent that wild, musky, forest-like aroma intensifying. Celine felt a strange pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. It was unsettling, exhilarating, and utterly undeniable. He reached down and picked up the ring. He held it, twirling it between his fingers. "The first step is confronting your fears." He held the ring out. Celine looked at him, that spark of hope within her now a steadier glow. It would be a long and difficult journey, she knew. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She had Valerian. And she had a purpose. She wanted the curse broken. She wanted to protect her family's legacy. She straightened her shoulders and, without hesitation, extended her trembling hand. Valerian slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Almost immediately, another spike of pain, this one even sharper, shot up her arm and into her head. But with the pain came something else. A sense of wholeness. Chapter 7. The touch that ignites the soul. The pain, though intense, was fleeting. It subsided, leaving behind a tingling sensation that spread from the ring on her finger, up her arm, and throughout her entire body. Celine gasped, her eyes widening, as she felt a surge of something coursing through her veins. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was power. Raw, untamed, exhilarating power. She looked down at the ring, at the wolf's head with its mesmerizing golden eyes. It seemed to glow with an inner light, pulsating in time with her heartbeat. She felt different, stronger, more alive, more connected. Valerian watched her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of satisfaction and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. Perhaps pride? How do you feel? He asked, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. Celine took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. I feel she struggled to find the words. Different. Like something has awakened inside me. It has, Valerian said softly. The ring, it is a conduit, a focus for your power. It amplifies your connection to your wolf nature, to your heritage. He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space, his scent that wild, musky, forest-like aroma intensifying. Celine felt a strange pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. It was a pull that was both terrifying and exhilarating, a pull that she had felt before, in the chapel, but now it was stronger, more intense, more undeniable. But the ring alone is not enough, Valerian continued, his gaze locking with hers. It is merely a tool, a catalyst. The true power lies within you. He reached out, his long, elegant fingers hovering over her hand, over the ring. He didn't touch her, not yet, but Celine could feel the warmth emanating from his skin, the subtle hum of energy that surrounded him. To fully embrace your power, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, you must connect. With your wolf. With your true self. Celine frowned, confused.
Connect? How?
Valerian smiled, a slow, seductive smile that sent a shiver down her spine. There are ways, he said, cryptically. Rituals. Practices. Ancient techniques that have been passed down through generations. He paused, his golden eyes searching her face. But the most powerful connection, the most profound awakening comes from the touch. He gently took her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers, his skin cool and smooth against her own. Celine gasped, a jolt of electricity shooting through her, a wave of heat washing over her body. It was a touch that was both familiar and utterly foreign, a touch that ignited something deep within her, a spark of desire. It was a desire she hadn't felt in decades, not since Thomas. But this was different. This was primal, instinctive, a yearning that went beyond mere physical attraction. It was a soul-deep connection, a recognition, a reunion. Valerian's grip tightened on her hand, his golden eyes burning into hers. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her cheek, his scent intoxicating her senses. The touch of your true mate, he whispered, his voice a low, husky murmur that sent shivers down her spine. It can unlock untold power. It can break any curse. Celine stared at him, her mind reeling. Was he suggesting? He leaned in even closer, his lips brushing against her ear. Feel it, Celine, he whispered. Feel the connection, the pull, the awakening. His lips brushed against her neck, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated desire through her. Celine closed her eyes, her body trembling, her senses overwhelmed. She felt lost, adrift in a sea of sensation, of emotion, of longing. She wanted to pull away, to resist, to deny the feelings that were surging through her. But she couldn't. She was trapped, captivated by his touch, by his presence, by the undeniable power that emanated from him. He pulled back slightly, his golden eyes searching hers, questioning, probing. Do you feel it? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Celine opened her eyes, her gaze locking with his. She couldn't deny it. She did feel it. The connection, the pull, the awakening. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly undeniable. Yes, she whispered, her voice trembling. I feel it. Valerian smiled, a slow, triumphant smile that sent a shiver of both apprehension and anticipation through her. He knew. He knew the power he held over her, the effect he had on her. And he was relishing it. He released her hand, taking a step back, giving her some space. Celine felt a sudden pang of loss, a void where his touch had been. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling a sudden chill, despite the warmth of the fire in the hearth. We will explore this further, Valerian said, his voice regaining its usual edge. But not tonight. Tonight you need to rest. To process. He gestured towards the small bedroom that adjoined the living room. Sleep, Celine, he said.
And dream.
Dream of the wolf. He began walking towards the door. I will be nearby.
Should you need me?
His golden eyes held a different quality to them as he stared at her. He opened the door. Valerian, Celine said, desperate. He stopped and looked back at her. Celine couldn't explain the intensity of emotions that overcame her. She was afraid. And yet, Valerian slowly closed the door and crossed the room. The distance was covered in an instant. He cradled her face in his hands. He looked at her as though she was the moon, and he was the tide. Do not be afraid, he whispered, and kissed her forehead. The touch, although innocent, sent waves through her entire being. And then, with one last look, he left. As the door closed, she raised her fingers to the spot where he had kissed her. She had never, ever, felt such an intense feeling as she had with that one touch. What was going to happen? Chapter 8. Whispers of rebellion and desire. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful and restless. Celine's dreams were a chaotic tapestry of fragmented images, swirling emotions, and whispered voices. She saw Thomas, his face contorted in terror, reaching out to her from the depths of a raging sea. She saw the shadowy figure, its malevolent golden eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. And she saw Valerian, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of desire and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. She woke with a start, her heart pounding, her body drenched in sweat. The room was dark, the only light filtering through the curtains from the pre-dawn sky. The silence was deafening, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. She sat up in bed, her mind racing, trying to make sense of the jumble of images and emotions that had plagued her dreams. The ring on her finger felt heavy, a constant reminder of the oath she had sworn, the path she had chosen. She got out of bed, her legs shaky beneath her. She walked over to the window, pushing aside the curtains, and looked out at the town, still shrouded in the soft, gray light of early morning. The sea was calm, a vast expanse of shimmering silver stretching out to the horizon. She thought of Thomas, of the life they had shared, of the love that had bound them together. She felt a pang of guilt, a sense of betrayal, for the feelings that Valerian had awakened within her. Feelings she hadn't experienced in decades, feelings she thought she had buried long ago. But those feelings, they were undeniable. The connection with Valerian, the pull, the desire, it was something she couldn't ignore, something that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She turned away from the window, her gaze falling on the small, antique mirror that hung above her dresser. She looked at her reflection, at the woman staring back at her, a woman with gray hair, lines etched around her eyes and mouth, a woman who looked older, wearier than she felt. But there was something else in her reflection, something new, something different. A spark in her eyes, a flush on her cheeks, a subtle shift in her posture. She looked stronger, more alive, more aware. She touched the ring on her finger, feeling the familiar tingle of power coursing through her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and tried to connect with the wolf that Valerian had spoken of. She didn't know what to expect, how to do it, but she focused on the feeling, on the energy that thrummed beneath her skin, on the wildness that she had always sensed within herself, but had always suppressed. For a moment, nothing happened. And then she felt it. A flicker, a spark, a subtle shift in her awareness. She felt a presence within her, a primal instinct, a heightened sense of everything. She opened her eyes, her gaze sharper, her senses more acute. She could hear the faint chirping of birds outside, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the distant sound of the waves lapping against the shore. She could smell the salt in the air, the scent of the damp earth in her garden, the lingering aroma of Valerian's presence in the cottage. A smile touched her lips. It was a small victory, a tiny step, but it was a beginning. She spent the next few hours exploring this new awareness, experimenting with her senses, trying to understand the wolf within. She walked around the cottage, touching objects, feeling their textures, listening to their subtle vibrations. She went outside into her garden, her bare feet on the damp grass, feeling the earth beneath her, the sun on her skin. She felt connected, grounded, more alive than she had felt in years. She felt free. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the town, Celine heard a knock on her door. She knew, instinctively, who it was. She opened the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Valerian stood there, tall and imposing, his golden eyes studying her with an unnerving intensity. He looked different somehow. More relaxed, less guarded. "You slept," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a question. Celine nodded. "Yes," she replied, her voice stronger than she expected. "And I dreamed." Valerian smiled, a slow, seductive smile that sent a wave of heat through her. "Of the wolf?" he asked. Celine hesitated, then nodded again. "Yes," she said. "And of you." Valerian's smile widened, his golden eyes gleaming with a mixture of satisfaction and desire. He stepped inside, his presence filling the small space, his scent that wild, musky, forest-like aroma intoxicating her senses. "Good," he murmured, his gaze locking with hers. "The connection, it grows stronger." He reached out, his long fingers gently touching her cheek. Celine flinched at the contact, a jolt of electricity shooting through her. But this time, she didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her body trembling. "I felt it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The wolf. It's real." Valerian's fingers trailed down her neck, lingering on the pulse point that fluttered beneath her skin. "It is," he said softly. "And it is a part of you. A part you must embrace if you are to break the curse." He paused, his golden eyes searching her face. "But there is resistance," he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge.
Doubt. Fear.
"The remnants of your old life." He stepped closer. His eyes held a challenge. "You must let go, Celine. You must surrender to the wolf." He placed one hand on her waist, and she instinctively placed a hand on his chest. She could feel the hard muscles and the heat that emanated from him. "Surrender?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Surrender," he repeated, and pulled her closer. The bodies touched, and a new, intoxicating feeling overcame her. It was rebellion and desire
Combined.
Chapter 9. The Price of Defiance. The word surrender hung in the air between them, a challenge, a promise, a threat. Celine's hand, still resting on Valerian's chest, tightened instinctively. She felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart beneath her palm, a rhythm that both soothed and excited her. The rebellion that had sparked within her, fueled by his touch, his nearness, grew stronger, a defiance against the fear, the doubt, the expectations. "Surrender to what?" she asked, her voice low and husky, her gaze locked with his.
To you?
"To the wolf. To this madness?" Valerian's golden eyes gleamed with amusement, with a hint of respect. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his head, his lips brushing against her ear, sending a shiver of both apprehension and anticipation through her. "To yourself, Celine," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "To your true nature. To the power that flows within you. To the inevitable." His hand, still resting on her waist, tightened, pulling her closer, until their bodies were pressed together, every curve, every contour aligned. Celine felt a wave of heat wash over her, a dizzying sensation that made her head spin. She wanted to pull away, to resist, to maintain some semblance of control, but she couldn't. She was trapped, captivated by his presence, by his touch, by the undeniable pull that existed between them. I don't know if I can, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's too much. Too fast. Valerian's lips brushed against her temple, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her. You are stronger than you think, Celine, he murmured. And you are not alone. I am here to guide you, to help you. Help me or control me. Celine challenged, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of defiance. Valerian chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through his chest and into her own. Perhaps a little of both, he conceded, his golden eyes sparkling with mischief. He leaned back slightly, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on her face, her lips, her eyes. Celine felt a blush creep up her cheeks, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. The curse it feeds on your doubt, your fear, your resistance, he said, his voice regaining its seriousness. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. The only way to break free is to embrace it, to accept it, to become it. Become a monster? Celine asked, her voice laced with apprehension. Valerian shook his head. Not a monster, Celine, he said softly. A force of nature, a creature of power, a queen. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw, sending shivers down her spine. You are meant for more than this quiet, solitary life, he said, his voice low and seductive. You are meant to rule, to command, to inspire. His words resonated with something deep within her, a hidden yearning, a desire for something more that she had always suppressed, always denied. But now, standing here, in Valerian's arms, feeling his power, his presence, his desire, she couldn't deny it any longer. And what if I refuse? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze challenging his. Valerian's smile faded, his golden eyes hardening. Then you will remain trapped, he said simply. A prisoner of the curse, a shadow of your true self. And you will be vulnerable to those who would seek to exploit your power, to control you, to destroy you. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the silver Celtic knot pendant that rested against her chest. The guardian, it grows stronger, he continued, his voice laced with a hint of warning. It senses your awakening, your defiance. And it will not hesitate to claim you. Celine felt a chill run down her spine, a cold, insidious fear that threatened to consume her. The vision of the shadowy figure, its malevolent golden eyes, flashed before her mind's eye. But there's a price, isn't there? She asked, her voice trembling. For surrendering, for embracing this power. Valerian nodded, his expression somber. Yes, he said softly. There is always a price. For everything. He took a deep breath. To break the curse completely, you must sever all human ties. He paused, again his golden eyes studying hers. You must leave this life, this town, these memories behind. Celine's heart clenched. Leave everything? Her home, her memories of Thomas, the life she had known. It was too much to ask. And Thomas? She asked desperately. His memory will always remain, Celine. But you must choose your destiny. You must choose the wolf. She closed her eyes. This was the price. It was almost too much to bear. Almost. But as she weighed the options, she knew there really was no choice. Not if she wanted to live. She opened her eyes and looked at Valerian. I will do it, she said, her voice resolute. A slow smile spread across his face. I knew you would. He leaned forward and claimed her lips with his. The kiss was slow, intense, and all-consuming. But when they finally broke apart, the feeling was short-lived. A loud crash came from outside. Valerian was instantly alert. They're here, he said. Chapter 10. Scars of the Past, Bonds of the Future. The crash was followed by a series of guttural snarls, the shattering of glass, and the splintering of wood. Celine's heart leaped into her throat, her newly heightened senses overwhelmed by the sudden onslaught of noise and something else of primal, instinctive fear that resonated deep within her bones. Valerian's reaction was instantaneous. He released her, his body tensing, his golden eyes flashing with a dangerous light. He moved with a speed that was impossible, blurring before her eyes, as he crossed the room and peered out the window, his hand instinctively going to something hidden beneath his coat. "What is it?" Celine asked, her voice trembling, her hand flying to her throat, clutching the silver Celtic knot pendant. "Hunters," Valerian said grimly, his voice low and tight. "The ones who cursed your ancestors. They've found us." Celine felt a wave of icy fear wash over her. Hunters, the ones who had murdered Thomas, the ones who were responsible for the ancient curse that had plagued her family for generations.
But how?
She whispered, her mind reeling. "How did they find us?" Valerian didn't answer immediately. He continued to scan the surroundings, his gaze fixed on something outside, his body poised for action. Then, he turned back to her, his expression grave. "The ring," he said, his voice urgent. "It amplifies your power, but it also makes you a beacon. It attracts those who would seek to control that power." Celine looked down at the ring on her finger, at the wolf's head with its mesmerizing golden eyes. It seemed to pulse with a renewed energy, a warning, a call to arms. What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her body trembling. Valerian's gaze softened slightly as he looked at her. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "We fight," he said softly, his voice laced with a surprising tenderness. "We fight for our survival, for our freedom, for our future." His touch sent a shiver of warmth through her, a spark of courage in the face of overwhelming fear. She nodded, her resolve strengthening, fueled by his presence, his confidence, his belief in her. "But I don't know how," she protested, her voice still trembling. "I'm not a fighter. I'm just you are more than you think, Celine," Valerian interrupted, his voice firm. "You have the blood of the wolf running through your veins. You have the power of your ancestors within you."
"And you have me."
He withdrew his hand, his expression hardening. "Stay here," he commanded. "Stay hidden. I will deal with them." He turned to leave, but Celine instinctively reached out, her hand grabbing his arm. "No," she said, her voice stronger this time, fueled by a newfound determination. "I won't hide. I'll fight with you." Valerian looked at her, his golden eyes searching hers, questioning, probing. He seemed surprised by her defiance, by her courage. "It's too dangerous, Celine," he said, his voice laced with concern. "You are not ready." "I may not be ready," Celine countered, her gaze locking with his. "But I'm not afraid. Not anymore." She thought of Thomas, of the life that had been stolen from him, of the ancient curse that had burdened her family for generations. She thought of the wolf within her, the power that she was only just beginning to understand. "I swore an oath," she said, her voice firm. "I promise to walk this path with you, to fight by your side, and I will not break that promise." Valerian stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, a smile of admiration, of respect, of something more. "Very well," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "Then let us fight together." He reached beneath his coat, pulling out a long, gleaming silver knife, its blade etched with strange symbols, similar to those on the ring. He handed it to Celine. "This it belonged to your ancestors," he said, his voice laced with reverence. "It is infused with their power. It will protect you." Celine took the knife, her hand trembling slightly. It felt heavy, cold, yet strangely familiar. She gripped it tightly, her knuckles turning white. Valerian drew a similar knife from beneath his own coat, his golden eyes flashing with a predatory light. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice urgent. "And trust your instincts." He opened the door, cautiously peering outside. The sounds of the fight had intensified, the snarls, the shouts, the clash of metal. There in the garden, he said, his voice low and tight. There are 3 of them. He turned to Celine, his gaze intense. Ready? He asked. Celine took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She nodded. Ready, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Valerian smiled, a fierce, predatory smile that sent a shiver of both fear and excitement through her. Then let us show them what it means to face an Ashworth and her mate. He stepped outside, Celine following close behind, the silver knife clutched tightly in her hand. As they emerged into the garden, she saw them. 3 figures, clad in dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks, wielding weapons of their own, swords, axes, and something that looked like a crossbow, loaded with silver-tipped arrows. The battle had begun, but as one of the hunters turned towards her, she saw a flash of recognition in his eyes, followed by a cruel smile. It was the same man who had delivered the anonymous letter, the one who had lured her to the chapel, the one who had started it all, and he was aiming directly at her. Chapter 11. The Unseen Watchers. The hunter's cruel smile sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through Celine. Her newly heightened senses, which had moments before felt like a source of strength, now seemed to amplify her fear, making her acutely aware of the danger she was in. The silver-tipped arrow, glinting in the morning sun, seemed to move in slow motion, its trajectory aimed directly at her heart. But before Celine could react, before she could even scream, Valerian moved. He blurred before her eyes, a whirlwind of motion, placing himself between her and the hunter, his own silver knife raised. The arrow struck, not Celine, but Valerian's arm, piercing his flesh with a sickening thud. He grunted in pain, but his grip on his knife didn't falter. He ripped the arrow out, tossing it aside as if it were a mere annoyance, his golden eyes blazing with fury. "You dare," he growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. "You dare to threaten what is mine?" The hunter, momentarily stunned by Valerian's speed and ferocity, stumbled back, his eyes widening in fear. He tried to raise his crossbow again, to reload, but Valerian was too fast. He lunged forward, his silver knife flashing, striking the hunter's arm with deadly precision. The crossbow clattered to the ground, useless. The hunter cried out in pain, clutching his wounded arm, his face contorted in agony. The other 2 hunters, witnessing their companion's swift defeat, hesitated, their initial confidence wavering. They exchanged glances, their expressions uncertain. Valerian turned his attention to them, his golden eyes burning with a predatory light. "Leave," he commanded, his voice cold and sharp. "Leave now, and I will spare your lives." The hunters, clearly intimidated by Valerian's power and ferocity, didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled, disappearing into the surrounding woods, their footsteps fading into the distance. Valerian watched them go, his body tense, his senses alert, ensuring they were truly gone. Then, he turned back to Celine, his expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with concern, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injuries. Celine nodded, her body still trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She was unharmed, physically, but the near-death experience had shaken her to her core. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But you're hurt." She gestured towards his arm, where the arrow had struck. The wound was bleeding, the blood staining his dark coat. Valerian glanced at his arm, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "It's nothing," he said. "A scratch." But Celine knew it was more than that. She could see the pain in his eyes, the slight grimace that he tried to conceal. "Let me see," she said, her voice firm, her hand reaching out towards his arm. Valerian hesitated, then reluctantly allowed her to examine the wound. Celine gently pushed aside his coat, revealing the torn flesh, the blood still flowing freely. "It needs to be cleaned and bandaged," she said, her voice regaining its composure. "We need to stop the bleeding." She looked around the garden, her gaze falling on a patch of herbs she had planted years ago, herbs that her grandmother had taught her to use for healing. "Come," she said, taking his hand and leading him towards the herb garden. I know what to do. She knelt down, her fingers carefully selecting the right herbs: yarrow, comfrey, and plantain plants known for their healing and antiseptic properties. She crushed the leaves in her hands, releasing their potent aroma, and then gently applied them to Valerian's wound. Valerian watched her, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and admiration. He seemed impressed by her knowledge, by her resourcefulness. You know healing, he said softly, his voice laced with curiosity. Celine nodded. My grandmother, she taught me, she replied, her voice focused on her task. She knew many things. About herbs, about the old ways. She tore a strip of cloth from her skirt, using it to bandage Valerian's wound, securing the herbs in place. She tied the bandage tightly, stopping the bleeding. There, she said, her voice satisfied. That should do it for now. She looked up at him, her gaze meeting his. Valerian's golden eyes were intense, searching, probing. He seemed to be seeing her in a new light. Thank you, Celine, he said softly, his voice laced with gratitude. He reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. Celine flinched at the contact, a jolt of electricity shooting through her. But it wasn't just electricity. It was something more. Something deeper, more profound. You are remarkable, he murmured, his gaze locking with hers. You are so much more than you appear. His words sent a shiver of warmth through her, a feeling of validation, of recognition, of belonging. She felt a connection with him, a bond that went beyond mere gratitude, beyond mere attraction. It was a soul-deep connection, a recognition of kindred spirits. But as they stood there, locked in each other's gaze, a sudden, chilling sensation washed over Celine. She felt watched, observed, as if unseen eyes were peering at them from the shadows. She looked around the garden, her senses alert, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw nothing, heard nothing, but the feeling persisted, a cold, unsettling presence that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. What is it? Valerian asked, his voice sharp, his gaze following hers. He, too, seemed to sense something amiss. I don't know, Celine whispered, her voice trembling. I feel watched. Like we're not alone. Valerian scanned the surroundings, his golden eyes narrowed, his body tense. He, too, felt the presence, the unseen watchers. He knew, instinctively, that this was not over. The hunters may have been driven off, but the threat it remained. And it was closer than they thought. He sensed it, a familiar darkness. One that he'd hoped he'd never encounter again. Chapter 12. A dance with fate and fire. The feeling of being watched intensified, a palpable sense of unease that settled over Celine like a suffocating shroud. The air grew heavy, charged with an almost tangible energy, and the shadows in the garden seemed to deepen, to writhe and twist with a life of their own. Valerian's hand tightened on hers, his grip firm and reassuring. He scanned the perimeter of the garden, his golden eyes narrowed, his senses on high alert. He could feel it too, the presence, the unseen watchers, the lurking danger. We need to leave, he said, his voice low and urgent. This place is no longer safe. Celine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't need to be told twice. The idyllic charm of her cottage garden, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap, a cage, with invisible eyes peering at them from every corner. Where do we go? She asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze darting nervously around the garden. Valerian didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be listening, his head tilted slightly, his golden eyes focused on some distant point beyond the garden walls. Then he turned to her, his expression grim. There is a place, he said, his voice thoughtful. An old sanctuary. A place of power. A place where we can prepare. Prepare for what? Celine asked, her voice laced with apprehension. For what is to come, Valerian replied cryptically, his gaze locking with hers. For the final confrontation. For the breaking of the curse. He paused, his golden eyes searching her face. It will be dangerous, Celine, he warned. More dangerous than anything you have faced so far. Are you ready for this? Celine hesitated, her mind reeling. The final confrontation, the breaking of the curse, it was what she had wanted, what she had sworn an oath to achieve. But now, faced with the reality of it, the sheer magnitude of the task ahead, she felt a surge of fear, of doubt. But she pushed those feelings aside, steeling her resolve. She had come this far. She had embraced her wolf nature, her heritage, her destiny. She would not back down now. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm, her gaze meeting his unflinchingly. Valerian smiled, a slow, approving smile that sent a shiver of warmth through her. Good, he said softly. Then let us go. Time is of the essence. He released her hand, taking a step back. We will travel by night, he said.
It is safer that way.
Less conspicuous. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on her simple cottage dress, her worn shoes. You will need different attire, he continued. Something more suitable for the journey. He turned and walked back towards the cottage, Celine following close behind. He entered the house, his movements swift and purposeful, heading directly towards the attic, a space Celine hadn't ventured into in years, not since Thomas's death. The attic was dusty and dimly lit, filled with cobwebs and forgotten relics of the past. Boxes overflowed with old clothes, furniture lay shrouded in sheets, and the air hung heavy with the scent of mothballs and decay. Valerian moved through the clutter with ease, his golden eyes scanning the contents of the room, as if searching for something specific. He stopped in front of a large wooden chest, its surface covered in intricate carvings, similar to those on the box that had held the ring. This, he said, his voice laced with reverence. This belonged to your grandmother. It contains what you will need. He opened the chest, revealing its contents, garments made of leather and fur, dark and durable, designed for travel, for battle. There was a long, hooded cloak, a pair of sturdy boots, and a silver dagger, its blade etched with the same wolf's head symbol as the ring. Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The clothes, they were beautiful, terrifying, and utterly familiar. She had seen them before in her dreams, in fleeting visions, in the shadowed corners of her memory. Put them on, Valerian commanded, his voice gentle but firm. Celine hesitated, then nodded. She took the garments from the chest, her fingers tracing the soft leather, the warm fur, the intricate details. She felt a strange connection to them, a sense of belonging, of returning. She changed quickly, shedding her old clothes, her old life, and donning the attire of her ancestors. The leather felt cool and smooth against her skin, the fur warm and comforting. The boots fit perfectly, as if they had been made for her. And the dagger, it felt like an extension of her own arm, a weapon she had been born to wield. When she was finished, she turned to Valerian, her heart pounding in her chest. He stood there, watching her, his golden eyes filled with approval, with desire. You look, he said softly, his voice a low, husky murmur that sent shivers down her spine. Magnificent. Like a warrior queen. His words sent a wave of heat through her, a blush creeping up her cheeks. She felt transformed, empowered, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Valerian stepped closer, his presence filling the small space, his scent that wild, musky, forest-like aroma intoxicating her senses. He reached out, his fingers gently touching the silver dagger that hung at her side. This, it is more than just a weapon, Celine, he said, his voice low and serious. It is a symbol of your power, your heritage, your destiny. He paused, his golden eyes locking with hers. And tonight, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, we dance with fate and with fire. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. Are you ready to dance, my queen? He whispered. Celine's breath caught in her throat. She looked into his eyes, those mesmerizing golden eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. She nodded, unable to speak, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was ready, ready to dance, ready to fight, ready to live. But as he pulled her closer, she saw a flicker of movement outside the attic window, a dark shadow against the twilight sky, a a pair of malevolent golden eyes watching them, waiting. The guardian was closer than they thought. Chapter 13. The Heart's Unspoken Truth. The fleeting glimpse of the shadowy figure outside the attic window sent a jolt of ice-cold fear through Celine, momentarily eclipsing the warmth of Valerian's presence, the intoxicating closeness of their bodies. Her hand instinctively went to the silver dagger at her side, her fingers tightening around the hilt, a primal instinct of self-preservation kicking in. Did you see that? She whispered, her voice trembling, her gaze fixed on the window, searching for any sign of the creature she had seen. Valerian's body tensed, his golden eyes narrowing, his senses on high alert. He, too, had sensed the presence, the lurking danger, the malevolent gaze. He slowly released her, his hand moving to the silver knife hidden beneath his coat, his posture shifting, ready to defend, to protect. "Yes," he said grimly, his voice low and tight. "The Guardian. It is drawing closer. It is testing us." He scanned the surroundings, his gaze sweeping over the dusty attic, the cobweb-draped furniture, the narrow window. He knew they were vulnerable here, exposed, trapped in a confined space with limited escape routes. "We need to leave," he said urgently.
"Now.
Before it attacks." He grabbed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and pulled her towards the attic door, his movements swift and purposeful. They descended the narrow, creaking stairs, their footsteps echoing in the silent house, their senses on high alert, listening for any sound, any sign of the creature that stalked them. As they reached the ground floor, Valerian paused, his head tilted slightly, his golden eyes focused on the front door. He could sense something different, something unnatural. "The door," he said softly, his voice laced with suspicion. "It's warded."
"Sealed."
"We can't go out that way."
Celine's heart sank.
They were trapped.
Cornered.
The Guardian had anticipated their escape, had blocked their path, had outmaneuvered them. What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her gaze darting nervously around the room, searching for an alternative exit. Valerian didn't answer immediately. He seemed to be thinking, his mind racing, weighing their options, calculating their chances. Then, his gaze fell on the fireplace, on the large, stone hearth that dominated one wall of the living room. "The chimney," he said, his voice thoughtful. "It's a long shot, but it might be our only way out." Celine looked at the fireplace, her eyes widening in disbelief. The chimney, it was narrow, dark, and dangerous. But she knew, instinctively, that Valerian was right. It was their only hope. "All right," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, her resolve strengthening. "Let's do it." Valerian nodded, his expression grim. "Stay close to me," he commanded. "And be quiet." He moved towards the fireplace, his movements fluid and graceful, his body radiating a quiet power, a contained energy that both intimidated and reassured her. He knelt down, examining the hearth, searching for something. "There's a mechanism," he said softly, his fingers tracing the outline of a particular stone, a stone that was slightly different from the others, a stone that bore a faint, almost invisible symbol. "A hidden latch. It will open a passage." He pressed the stone, his fingers applying a precise pressure, a specific angle. There was a click, a soft grinding sound, and a section of the hearth slid open, revealing a narrow, dark opening, a secret passage that led downwards, into the unknown. Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. A secret passage in her own home, a passage she had never known existed. It was another layer of mystery, another revelation, another piece of the puzzle that was her life, her heritage, her destiny. "After you," Valerian said, his voice gentle, his golden eyes meeting hers. Celine hesitated, then nodded. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve, and stepped into the darkness, Valerian following close behind. The passage was narrow and steep, descending at a sharp angle, forcing them to move slowly, carefully, their hands brushing against the cold, damp stone walls. The air was thick and musty, filled with the scent of earth and something else, something ancient, something primal. As they descended deeper, Celine felt a strange sensation, a tingling in her skin, a hum of energy that resonated within her bones. She felt connected, grounded, more alive than she had felt in years. She felt the wolf. She looked at Valerian, his silhouette barely visible in the dim light that filtered down from the opening above. He seemed to be unaffected by the darkness, by the confined space, by the unnatural energy that permeated the passage. He moved with a confidence, a certainty, that both reassured and intimidated her. Where does this passage lead?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, her words echoing in the narrow space. "To the sea," Valerian replied softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "To a hidden cove. A place where we can escape. A place where we can prepare. The sea, the very place where Thomas had died, the place where her journey had begun." It was a fitting destination, a symbolic return, a full circle. As they continued their descent, Celine's thoughts drifted back to Thomas, to the love they had shared, to the life that had been stolen from him. She felt a pang of guilt, a sense of betrayal, for the feelings that Valerian had awakened within her, feelings that were growing stronger, more intense, more undeniable. She knew, deep down, that Thomas would want her to be happy, to find love again, to live. But the transition, the shift in her affections, it felt too fast, too sudden, too complicated. She glanced at Valerian, his golden eyes gleaming in the darkness, his presence both comforting and unsettling. She was drawn to him, irresistibly so, but there was also a part of her that resisted, that held back, that feared. She wanted to ask him about his past, about his experiences, about the centuries he had alluded to. She wanted to understand him, to know him, to trust him. But there was something unspoken between them, a hidden truth, a secret that lay buried beneath the surface of their connection. A truth that she sensed, instinctively, would change everything. A truth that she was both desperate to know and terrified to discover. It was the truth of his heart. And hers. Chapter 14. Betrayal and the Crushing Weight of Truth. The passage finally leveled out, opening into a small, hidden cove, shielded from the open sea by a jagged outcrop of rocks. The air was fresh and salty, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore a constant, rhythmic roar. The moon, now high in the sky, cast a silvery glow over the scene, illuminating the dark sand, the turbulent water, and the towering cliffs that surrounded the cove. Celine stepped out of the passage, taking a deep breath of the cool night air, feeling a sense of relief, of escape. But the relief was short-lived. The feeling of being watched, the sense of lurking danger, returned, stronger than ever. Valerian followed her out of the passage, his senses on high alert, his golden eyes scanning the surroundings, searching for any sign of the threat he knew was there. He could feel it, the presence, the malevolent energy, the guardian. "It's close," he said grimly, his voice low and tight. "Very close." He reached out, his hand taking hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "Stay close to me," he commanded. "And be ready." Celine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, her hand tightening around the silver dagger at her side. She was afraid, terrified, but she also felt a surge of determination, of resolve. She would not back down. She would not surrender. She would fight. They moved towards the water's edge, their footsteps muffled by the soft sand, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows, the rocks, the cliffs, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of the creature that stalked them. And then they saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, a tall, imposing silhouette against the moonlit sky. It was humanoid, but distorted, unnatural, its limbs elongated, its head wolf-like, its eyes burning with a malevolent, golden light. "The Guardian," Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her body trembling. The creature, it was even more terrifying in reality than it had been in her visions, in her dreams. It radiated an aura of pure evil, of unbridled power. Valerian stepped forward, placing himself between Celine and the creature, his own silver knife raised, his body tense, ready to defend, to protect. "Stay back, Celine," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous, his golden eyes fixed on the guardian. But Celine didn't move. She stood her ground, her gaze locked with the creature's, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else, a strange, unsettling sense of recognition. "You," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the waves. "You were there the night Thomas died." The guardian tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement, its golden eyes gleaming with amusement, with contempt. "Indeed," it said, its voice a guttural growl that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. "I was there. I watched him drown. I felt his fear, his despair." Celine felt a surge of rage, of fury, coursing through her veins. She wanted to attack, to kill, to avenge Thomas's death, but she knew she was no match for the creature's power.
"Why?"
she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Why did you do it?" The guardian smiled, a cruel, predatory smile that revealed sharp, menacing teeth. "He was in the way," it said simply. "A hindrance. A weakness." It paused, its gaze sweeping over Celine, lingering on the silver ring on her finger, the wolf's head symbol gleaming in the moonlight. "But you," it continued, its voice taking on a new tone, a tone of interest, of desire. "You're different. You're strong. You have potential." It took a step closer, its eyes burning into hers. "Join me, Celine," it said, its voice seductive, alluring. "Embrace your true power. Become what you were meant to be." Celine felt a strange pull towards the creature, a temptation, a yearning. It was the curse, she realized, the ancient power that had been awakened within her, drawing her towards the darkness, towards destruction. But she resisted. She fought against the pull, against the temptation, against the inevitable. She thought of Thomas, of his love, of his sacrifice. She thought of Valerian, of his protection, of his guidance, of his affection. "Never," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "I will never join you." The guardian's smile faded, its golden eyes hardening. "Then you will die," it said coldly, "like all the others." It lunged forward, its claws extended, its movements swift and deadly. But before it could reach her, Valerian intervened, his silver knife flashing, deflecting the creature's attack. "You will not touch her," Valerian growled, his voice a low, menacing rumble, his golden eyes blazing with fury. The two figures clashed, a whirlwind of motion, of steel and claw, of light and darkness. Celine watched, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses overwhelmed by the speed, the ferocity, the power of the fight. She wanted to help, to intervene, but she knew she would only be a hindrance. Valerian was the only one who could stand against the guardian, the only one who could protect her. As they fought, Valerian spoke, his voice strained but clear. "The curse. It was never about your bloodline, Celine. It was about
"Me?"
The guardian laughed, the sound echoing across the cove. Valerian continued, dodging a blow. I am the one who cursed your family. Centuries ago." Celine felt as if the world had stopped. Valerian was the cause of all of this? "I was jealous," Valerian continued, grunting with effort, "of your ancestor's power, of his bond with his true mate. I wanted it for myself." The guardian struck, and Valerian cried out, falling to his knees. "But I didn't know," he stammered, looking at Celine, his golden eyes pleading. "I didn't know that the curse would bind me to your family, forever. That I would be forced to protect you, to love you." The guardian stood over him, victorious. "Enough," it snarled. "Now, Celine, choose. Join me, or watch him die." Celine stared, numb with shock, with horror, and with the ultimate betrayal. Valerian, the one she had trusted, the one she had loved, was the source of all her pain. Chapter 15. The gathering storm. The revelation, Valerian's confession, hung in the air, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate Celine. Her world, her reality, everything she had believed, everything she had felt, shattered into a million pieces, leaving her adrift in a sea of confusion, of betrayal, of despair. She stared at Valerian, his body battered and bruised, kneeling before the guardian, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain, regret, and pleading. He was the monster, the source of the curse, the architect of her family's suffering, and yet he was also the one who had protected her, guided her, awakened her, loved her. The guardian's words echoed in her mind, a cruel ultimatum. Choose. Join me, or watch him die. Her heart ached, torn between hatred and something else, something she couldn't quite define, something that resembled forgiveness, understanding, even love. She hated him for what he had done, for the centuries of suffering he had inflicted upon her ancestors, upon Thomas, upon her. But she also understood. She understood the jealousy, the loneliness, the desire for connection, for belonging. She looked at the guardian, its malevolent golden eyes burning with anticipation, its claws extended, ready to strike the final blow. She knew she had a choice to make, a decision that would determine not only her own fate, but the fate of Valerian, the fate of her family, the fate of everything. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to center herself, to find some semblance of clarity amidst the chaos, the turmoil, the heartbreak. She thought of Thomas, of his gentle smile, of his unwavering love, of his belief in her. She thought of her grandmother, of her wisdom, of her strength, of her guidance. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on Valerian, his golden eyes meeting hers, pleading, hopeful, resigned. She saw the truth in his eyes, the raw, unfiltered emotion, the love. It was a twisted love, a tainted love, born of darkness and deceit, but it was love, nonetheless. And she knew what she had to do. She began, her voice trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. I choose, but before she could finish her sentence, before she could make her decision, before she could utter the words that would seal her fate, the ground beneath them began to shake, a violent tremor that sent cracks spreading across the sand, the rocks, the cliffs. The guardian stumbled, its eyes widening in surprise, its concentration broken. Valerian seized the opportunity, pushing himself to his feet, his silver knife still clutched in his hand, his gaze fixed on Celine, his expression determined.
No.
He shouted, his voice a desperate plea. Don't choose.
Fight.
Fight for yourself. Fight for us. The tremor intensified, the earth groaning and cracking, the sea churning and roiling, the sky darkening, swirling with ominous clouds, illuminated by flashes of lightning. The air crackled with energy, with power, with something else, something ancient, something primal. Celine felt it, a surge of energy coursing through her veins, a tingling sensation that spread from the ring on her finger, up her arm, and throughout her entire body. She felt connected, grounded, more alive than she had ever felt before. She felt the wolf. She looked down at the ring, at the wolf's head with its mesmerizing golden eyes. It seemed to glow with an inner light, pulsating in time with her heartbeat, resonating with the power that was surging around them, within them. She understood finally. It wasn't just the curse, it wasn't just Valerian, it wasn't just the guardian. It was her. Her power, her heritage, her destiny. She raised her head, her gaze fixed on the guardian, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire, a newfound strength, a newfound resolve. I choose, she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing across the cove, above the roar of the waves, the rumble of the earth, the crackle of the lightning. Myself. She lunged forward, her silver dagger raised, her movements swift and fluid, guided by instinct, by the wolf. She was no longer the grieving widow, the lonely woman, the victim. She was the Ashworth heir, the protector, the queen. The guardian, caught off guard by her sudden attack, by the surge of power that emanated from her, recoiled, its eyes widening in fear. It tried to defend itself, to block her attack, but it was too late. Celine's dagger struck, piercing the creature's flesh, drawing a guttural cry of pain, of surprise. The creature stumbled back, its eyes filled with disbelief. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The Guardian, wounded but not defeated, regained its composure, its eyes burning with renewed fury, with hatred. It lunged at Celine, its claws extended, its movements swift and deadly. And the storm it raged on. A storm of magic, of power, of destiny. A storm that would determine the fate of them all. It was a gathering storm of epic proportions, and at its center stood Celine, finally embracing her true self, finally ready to fight. Chapter 16. Into the Abyss of Shadows. The Guardian, enraged and wounded, lunged at Celine with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Its claws, sharp as razors, whistled through the air, narrowly missing her as she dodged, her movements fluid and instinctive, guided by the wolf within. The storm raged around them, a tempest of wind and rain and lightning, mirroring the turmoil, the chaos, the power struggle that unfolded on the beach. Celine fought with a strength she never knew she possessed, her silver dagger a blur of motion, deflecting the Guardian's attacks, striking back whenever she saw an opening. She was no longer afraid, no longer hesitant, no longer uncertain. She was focused, determined, driven by a primal instinct to survive, to protect, to avenge. Valerian, recovering from his injuries, joined the fray, his own silver knife flashing, his movements swift and deadly. He fought alongside Celine, their bodies moving in perfect sync, their attacks coordinated, their connection palpable. It was a dance of death, a ballet of blades, a testament to their bond, their destiny. But the Guardian was strong, incredibly so, its power fueled by centuries of darkness, of cursed energy. It shrugged off their attacks, its wounds healing with unnatural speed, its eyes burning with a malevolent, golden light. "You cannot defeat me," it roared, its voice echoing across the cove, above the din of the storm. "I am eternal. I am inevitable." Celine felt a surge of doubt, of fear, creeping into her heart. Was the Guardian right? Was it unbeatable? Was their struggle futile? But then she looked at Valerian, his golden eyes meeting hers, his expression determined, unwavering. She saw the trust in his eyes, the belief, the love. And she knew she couldn't give up. She couldn't surrender. She had to fight. "We may not be able to defeat you," she shouted, her voice clear and strong, defying the storm, defying the Guardian, defying fate. "But we can weaken you. We can break the curse." She focused on the ring on her finger, on the wolf's head symbol, on the power that flowed within her. She channeled that power, that energy, into her dagger, infusing it with her will, her determination, her rage. The dagger began to glow, a bright, silvery light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, resonating with the storm, with the wolf. It was a beacon of hope, a symbol of defiance, a weapon of light. She lunged at the Guardian, her movements swift and precise, her dagger striking true, piercing the creature's heart. The Guardian screamed, a guttural cry of pain, of anguish, that echoed across the cove, across the sea, across the ages. Its body convulsed, its form flickering, its eyes dimming, its power waning. But it wasn't enough. The Guardian, though weakened, though wounded, was still alive, still dangerous. It ripped the dagger from its chest, tossing it aside as if it were a mere toy, its eyes burning with renewed fury, with hatred. "You cannot kill me," it gasped, its voice a rasping whisper, its body trembling, its form unstable. It raised its claws, ready to strike the final blow, to end Celine's life, to claim her soul. But before it could move, Valerian intervened, tackling the creature, wrestling it to the ground, their bodies locked in a desperate struggle. "Celine!" he shouted, his voice strained, his body trembling with exertion. "The abyss. You must send it back. To the shadows." Celine understood instinctively. The abyss, the place from which the Guardian had come, the source of its power, the realm of darkness. She had to banish it, to seal it away, to end its reign of terror. She looked around the cove, her gaze searching for something, anything, that could help her. And then she saw it. The secret passage, the opening in the cliff face, the gateway to the sea. It was still open, a dark, gaping maw that led downwards, into the unknown. It was the abyss. She ran towards the opening, her heart pounding in her chest, her senses on high alert. She could feel the guardian's presence, its malevolent energy, its desperation. It was trying to break free from Valerian's grasp, to stop her, to claim her. She reached the edge of the passage, the darkness swirling beneath her, beckoning her, inviting her to fall. She hesitated, her mind reeling, her body trembling. It was a terrifying prospect, a leap of faith, a descent into the unknown. But she knew she had no choice. She had to do it. For Thomas, for her ancestors, for Valerian, for herself. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and focused on the ring, on the wolf, on the power that flowed within her. She channeled that power, that energy, into her voice, into her will, into her soul. "I banish you," she shouted, her voice echoing across the cove, resonating with the storm, with the abyss. "I send you back, to the shadows, from whence you came." She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the darkness below. And then she jumped. She fell, plummeting into the abyss, the darkness enveloping her, consuming her, the wind whistling past her ears, the cold, damp air chilling her to the bone. She felt lost, adrift, alone. But she wasn't alone. She felt the wolf, its presence within her, guiding her, protecting her, empowering her. And she felt Valerian, his connection to her, his love, his sacrifice. She landed with a thud, on solid ground, in a dark, cavernous space, filled with shadows, with whispers, with the remnants of the guardian's power. She stood up, her body trembling, her senses on high alert. She could feel the creature's presence, its weakened, fading energy, its despair. It was trapped, banished, defeated. But as she looked around the cavern, she saw something else. A faint, flickering light in the distance. A light that beckoned her. A light that promised hope. What was waiting for her? Chapter 17. The Reclaiming of Power. The faint, flickering light drew Celine deeper into the cavern. A beacon of hope in the oppressive darkness. A promise of something more. She moved cautiously, her senses on high alert, her silver dagger clutched tightly in her hand, her body still trembling from the fall, from the confrontation, from the descent into the abyss. The air was heavy and still, filled with the scent of damp earth, of decay, and of something else, something ancient, something magical. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional drip of water, the faint whisper of voices, and the rhythmic pounding of her own heart. As she drew closer to the light, she began to make out the details of the cavern. It was vast, much larger than she had initially realized, its walls lined with strange, glowing crystals, its floor covered in bones, the remnants of past victims, past sacrifices. A shiver ran down her spine, a cold, unsettling feeling that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. This place, it was a tomb, a prison, a source of power. The light, she realized, emanated from a large, crystalline structure at the center of the cavern, a towering monolith that pulsed with a soft, ethereal glow. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, and terrifying. She approached the structure cautiously, her eyes scanning its surface, searching for something, anything, that could explain its purpose, its meaning. And then she saw it. Inscriptions, carved into the crystal, ancient symbols, similar to those on the ring, on the dagger, on the chest in the attic. Symbols of power, of heritage, of the wolf. She reached out, her fingers tracing the outline of the symbols, feeling a strange connection to them, a sense of recognition, of belonging. As she touched the crystal, a surge of energy coursed through her, a tingling sensation that spread from her fingertips, up her arm, and throughout her entire body. She felt stronger, more alive, more connected. She felt the wolf, its presence within her, amplified, intensified, by the power of the crystal. And then she heard it. A voice, soft and gentle, yet powerful, resonating within her mind, within her soul. "Celine," it whispered. "Daughter of the Ashworths, you have returned." Celine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. The voice, it was familiar, yet foreign. It was her grandmother. "Grandmother?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, child," the voice replied. "It is I and all those who came before. We are here within the crystal, within the source." Celine looked at the crystalline structure, her mind reeling, her emotions overwhelming her. The crystal, it wasn't just a source of power, it was a repository, a vessel, a memory. It contained the spirits, the essence, the knowledge of her ancestors.
But how?
She asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The curse," the voice explained. "It trapped us, bound us to this place, preventing us from passing on, from finding peace." "But Valerian," Celine said, her voice filled with confusion, with betrayal. He said he was the one who cursed us." The voice sighed, a soft, mournful sound that echoed through the cavern. "He did," it confirmed, "but not intentionally. He was manipulated, deceived by the guardian, by the darkness." Celine felt a wave of relief, of understanding, washing over her. Valerian, he wasn't the monster she had believed him to be. He was a victim, just like her ancestors. "The guardian," she said, her voice filled with renewed determination. "It's banished. But is it truly gone?" "No, child," the voice replied. "It is weakened but not destroyed. It will return. Unless you break the curse completely." "How?" Celine asked, her voice urgent, her gaze fixed on the crystal. "How do I break the curse?" "You must reclaim your power," the voice said. "Embrace your wolf fully. Become one with the source." "Become one with the source?" Celine echoed, her mind struggling to grasp the implications of the words. "But how?" The voice was silent for a moment, then it spoke again, its tone different, stronger, more commanding. "You must merge with the crystal," it said. "Surrender your physical form, become part of the collective, become the guardian of your lineage." Celine recoiled, a gasp escaping her lips. Merge with the crystal? Surrender her physical form? Become a spirit? It was a terrifying prospect, a sacrifice, a loss of self. She stared at the crystal. She thought of her life, of Thomas, of Valerian. But then she thought about her ancestors, the pain they had endured, the power that was rightfully hers. She closed her eyes. "I am ready," she whispered. She stepped forward and placed her hands on the cold crystal surface. A surge of energy, intense and overwhelming, flowed through her. She could hear the voices of her ancestors, welcoming her, guiding her. She felt herself changing, transforming, becoming something more, becoming one with the source, becoming the wolf, becoming that power. Chapter 18. Love's Sacrifice, Soul's Redemption. As Celine's hands touched the crystal, a blinding light erupted, filling the cavern with an ethereal glow, a surge of raw power that shook the very foundations of the earth. She felt a sensation of dissolving, of unraveling, of becoming something more, something other. Her physical form began to shimmer, to fade, to merge with the crystalline structure, her essence, her memories, her soul joining the collective consciousness of her ancestors. It was a terrifying, exhilarating, and liberating experience. She felt the pain, the suffering, the struggles of her lineage, but she also felt their strength, their resilience, their love. She felt connected, whole, complete, a part of something ancient, something powerful, something eternal. She was no longer Celine Ashworth, the grieving widow, the lonely woman, the victim. She was the Ashworth heir, the protector, the queen, the wolf. She was the source. But as she merged with the crystal, as she embraced her destiny, as she reclaimed her power, she felt a pang of regret, of loss, of longing. She thought of Valerian, of his love, of his sacrifice, of his redemption. She had banished the guardian, she had broken the curse, she had saved her family, but at what cost? She had lost him. She had lost herself. She reached out, with her mind, with her soul, searching for him, for his presence, for his essence. She found him, in the cove, above the abyss, his body weakened, his spirit broken. He was waiting for her. "Valerian," she whispered, her voice echoing through the cavern, through the crystal, through the connection that still bound them together. He heard her, she knew. She felt his surprise, his relief, his love. "Celine," he whispered back, his voice weak, faint, but present. "You did it, you broke the curse," "Yes," she replied. "But at a price, I know," he said. "And I am sorry for everything, I know," she said again. "And I forgive you." There was a silence, a moment of understanding, of acceptance, of peace. Then Valerian spoke again, his voice even weaker, fainter, fading. "I love you, Celine," he whispered. "Always, and I love you." "Valerian," she replied, her voice choked with emotion, tears not of water, but of light streaming down her non-existent face. And then he was gone. His presence faded, his essence released, his soul free. Celine felt a profound sense of loss, of grief, but also of hope, of peace. Valerian was gone, but he was redeemed. He had sacrificed himself to save her family, to break the curse. And she was the source, the guardian of her lineage, the protector of her people, the embodiment of the wolf. She remained in the crystal, merged with her ancestors, her consciousness expanding, her awareness growing, her power unfolding. She could see everything, feel everything, know everything. She saw the future, the possibilities, the challenges. She saw the remnants of the guardian's power, still lurking in the shadows, still threatening. She knew she had a duty, a responsibility, a destiny. She had to protect the world, from the darkness, from evil. But she also knew she wasn't alone. She had her ancestors, their wisdom, their strength, their love. And she had Valerian's memory, his sacrifice, his redemption. She focused her power, her will, her energy on the world above, on the cove, on the abyss. She sealed the passage, closing the gateway, preventing the guardian, or any other creature of darkness, from ever returning. She then reached out, with her mind, with her soul, to the town, to her cottage, to her old life. She sent a message, a whisper, a farewell. She was gone, but she was not forgotten. She was the source, the wolf, the guardian. And she would always be there, watching, protecting, guiding. But then, as she felt herself settling into her new existence, she felt a tug. A familiar tug. Valerian. But different, he was calling to her. Not from the world of the living, but from somewhere else. She extended her consciousness, searching for him, and found him in a place of ethereal beauty, a realm of peace and light. He was smiling. "Celine," he said, his voice clear and strong.
"You came."
"Valerian," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "But how?" He explained how his sacrifice, his love for her, had not only broken the curse, but had also purified his soul, allowing him to transcend to this higher plane. He was free, and he was waiting for her. But she had a duty. She had to protect the world. He understood. He always had. But he also offered a solution, a way for them to be together without neglecting her responsibilities. He showed her how she could create an avatar, a physical representation of herself that could exist in the world while her true essence remained within the crystal. A way for her to walk among the living, to experience life, to love. She hesitated. It was a risk, but she trusted him. She always had. And she loved him. She always would. She agreed. And so, Celine, the source, the wolf, the guardian, created an avatar, a new body, a new life, and stepped back into the world, to be with Valerian, to start anew, to live again. But this time, she was not alone. She had her ancestors, she had her power, and she had her love. Her true, eternal love. Chapter 19. A Battle for the Ages. The Celine that stepped back into the cove was both familiar and utterly transformed. Her eyes, now a luminous silver, held the wisdom of ages, the power of the source, and the unwavering love for Valerian. The silver dagger that once belonged to her ancestors was now an extension of her will, humming with a power that resonated with the very air around them. The wind whipped around her, no longer a chaotic force, but a symphony conducted by her own essence. Valerian stood waiting, his form solid and vibrant, his golden eyes reflecting the same profound love that shone in hers. He no longer bore the weight of centuries of guilt and regret. He was free, redeemed, a being of light and power in his own right. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice a melody that resonated deep within her soul. Selene smiled, a radiant expression that lit up the cove. "And you, my love, are free." But their reunion, though joyous, was overshadowed by the knowledge of the task that still lay ahead. The guardian may have been banished, but its influence lingered, a dark stain on the world, a threat that needed to be eradicated completely. "The crystal it showed me," Selene said, her voice firm and resolute. "The guardian's essence it scattered, fragmented, but not destroyed. It seeks to reform, to return." Valerian nodded, his expression grim. "We cannot allow that to happen. We must hunt down the fragments, destroy them before they can coalesce."
"But how?"
Selene asked. "The world is vast, the fragments hidden." Valerian reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his touch sending a wave of warmth and strength through her. "The crystal it is a part of you now, Selene," he said. "You have access to its knowledge, its power. You can sense the fragments, track them, find them." Selene closed her eyes, focusing her mind, connecting with the source, with the collective consciousness of her ancestors. She felt it, a faint, pulsing darkness, scattered across the globe, like embers of a dying fire, waiting to be rekindled. "I can feel them," she said, her voice filled with a newfound confidence. "They're weak, scattered, but growing stronger." "Then we must act quickly," Valerian said, his voice urgent, "before they become too powerful to contain." He drew his own silver knife, its blade gleaming in the moonlight, a mirror image of Selene's, a symbol of their unity, their purpose. "We will hunt them together," he said, his golden eyes locking with hers. "As one." And so began their journey, a battle for the ages, a quest to cleanse the world of the Guardian's lingering darkness. They traveled across continents, across oceans, across realms, guided by Selene's connection to the source, by Valerian's unwavering support, by their unbreakable bond. They faced dangers, challenges, obstacles, beyond their wildest imaginations. They battled creatures of darkness, remnants of the Guardian's power, twisted and corrupted beings that sought to protect the fragments, to restore their master. They encountered allies, unexpected helpers, individuals who had been touched by the curse, by the darkness, but who had resisted, who had fought back. They found strength in unity, in shared purpose, in hope. Selene, as the Avatar, was still learning. And there were limitations. Her powers were immense, but she could not use the full extent of the abilities of the Source while maintaining a corporeal form. But with Valerian at her side, she knew there was nothing they could not overcome. Each fragment they destroyed, each creature they defeated, each ally they gained, brought them closer to their goal, to a world free from the Guardian's influence, to a future filled with light and love. But it was proving more difficult than they imagined. As they destroyed the last known fragment in a hidden cave, thousands of miles away from her little seaside town, Selene felt a sharp pain. It was as though she had been physically struck. Valerian was instantly by her side. "What is it?"
he asked, frantic. "The Guardian."
She gasped. It wasn't destroyed. Just reforming that elsewhere. She looked at Valerian, tears in her eyes. "It tricked us," she exclaimed. Valerian held her, supporting her. "We will figure this out, my love," he reassured. But he knew this was going to be the ultimate test. A test of their love, of their will, of their very reason for existence. The battle had truly just begun. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts. The realization that the Guardian had deceived them, that its essence was not scattered but reforming, sent a wave of despair and frustration through Celine. But the despair was quickly replaced by a surge of renewed determination, fueled by her connection to the source, by Valerian's unwavering support, and by the burning desire to protect the world from the encroaching darkness. "We need to find it," Celine said, her voice firm and resolute, her silver eyes blazing with a fierce light. "Before it regains its full strength. Before it becomes unstoppable." Valerian nodded, his expression grim, his golden eyes reflecting her determination. "The crystal, it must know where the Guardian is reforming," he said. "It must have a way to track it, to find it." Celine closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, with her soul, connecting to the source, to the collective consciousness of her ancestors. She delved deep into the crystal's vast knowledge, its ancient wisdom, its unparalleled power. And then she saw it. A vision, a fleeting image, a location. A place of immense power, a nexus of energy, a familiar landscape. Her cottage, her home, the place where it had all begun. "It's back where it started," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and understanding. "At my home." Valerian's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in realization. "Of course," he said, his voice laced with a hint of bitterness. "It's the perfect place. A place of personal significance. A place of power. A place where the veil between worlds is thin." He paused, his gaze meeting hers, his expression determined.
"We must go back," he said.
"We must confront it, once and for all." They returned to the cove, to the hidden passage, to the abyss. But this time, there was no descent into darkness, no leap of faith. Celine, empowered by the source, simply opened a gateway, a portal, a shortcut back to her home. They stepped through the portal, emerging not in the secret passage, but directly into the living room of her cottage. The room was different, transformed, corrupted by the Guardian's presence. The air was thick and heavy, filled with a malevolent energy. The walls were covered in strange, pulsating symbols. The furniture was twisted, distorted, grotesque. And in the center of the room, hovering above the fireplace, was the Guardian, its form almost fully restored, its eyes burning with a triumphant, golden light. It was larger, stronger, more terrifying than ever before. "Welcome home, Celine," it said, its voice a guttural growl that echoed through the room, shaking the very foundations of the house. "I have been expecting you." Celine felt a surge of fear, of doubt, but she pushed it aside, steeling her resolve, focusing on the power that flowed within her, on the love that bound her to Valerian, on the destiny that awaited her. "You will not win," she said, her voice clear and strong, her silver eyes blazing with defiance. "I will stop you, no matter the cost." The Guardian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You cannot stop me," it said. "I am inevitable. I am eternal." "We shall see," Valerian said, his voice a low, menacing rumble, his golden eyes fixed on the creature, his silver knife raised, ready to fight. The battle began, a clash of titans, a struggle between light and darkness, a final confrontation. The room became a vortex of energy, of power, of magic. Celine and Valerian fought with a ferocity, a skill, a unity that defied description. They were one, their movements synchronized, their attacks coordinated, their love a weapon in itself. But the Guardian was strong, incredibly so, its power amplified by the location, by the nexus of energy that existed within the cottage. It shrugged off their attacks, its wounds healing instantly, its eyes burning with a malevolent, triumphant light. It was a stalemate. Celine knew they couldn't win this way. The Guardian was too powerful. She needed to do something drastic. She looked at Valerian, and in his eyes, she saw the same understanding. There was only one way. She had to draw on the full power of the source, even if it meant losing her physical form. Forever. She closed her eyes and sent him a message, through their bond. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," he replied. And with that, Celine reached deep within herself, to the core of her being, to the source. She unleashed the full power of the crystal, of her ancestors, of the wolf. A blinding light erupted from her, filling the room, engulfing the guardian, consuming everything. The cottage, it was gone. The guardian, it was obliterated. And Celine, she was one with the source. Once again. But this time it was different. Valerian was with her. He had sacrificed his physical form too. Their souls, intertwined, merged with the source, becoming part of the collective consciousness, part of the eternal power. They were together. Forever. And from the source, they would watch over the world, protect it, guide it, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to their sacrifice, a promise of a brighter future. The battle was over. Love had won. And the curse was finally, truly broken. Epilogue. The world changed. Not overnight, not dramatically, but subtly, gradually, perceptibly. The darkness that had lingered for centuries, the influence of the guardian, the remnants of the curse, began to fade, to dissipate, replaced by a sense of hope, of peace, of renewal. People, unknowingly touched by the sacrifice of Celine and Valerian, felt a shift within themselves, a stirring of goodness, of compassion, of connection. The world became brighter, kinder, more loving. The cove, once a place of hidden secrets and lurking danger, transformed into a sanctuary, a place of pilgrimage, a source of inspiration. Flowers bloomed in abundance, the sea calmed, the air shimmered with an almost palpable energy. People came, drawn by an inexplicable pull, to feel the presence, the love, the peace that emanated from the place. They didn't know the story, the details, the sacrifice, but they felt it in their hearts, in their souls, in their bones. They felt the connection, the unity, the power of love. And sometimes on quiet nights, under the silvery glow of the moon, they would see them, two figures, bathed in light, walking hand in hand along the shore, their forms shimmering, ethereal, their love eternal. They were the guardians, the protectors, the source. They were Celine and Valerian. And their love story, a tale of sacrifice, of redemption, of unbreakable bonds, became a legend, whispered from generation to generation. A reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope prevails, love conquers all, and destiny can be rewritten. It was a story whispered on the wind, carried on the waves, a story etched into the very fabric of the world. The story of the woman who spoke a forbidden name, and the man who would never leave her side. A story of the wolf, and of the power of a love that transcended time, space, and even death itself. And though their physical forms were gone, their presence lingered, a constant, comforting, guiding force. A love story for the ages. A love story that had, truly, saved the world. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. A force that can heal. A force that can protect. A force that can transform. A force that can set us free. The end.